I just picked up a pair of Maxxis Rambler 700 by 40C tires that I'm going to put on my gravel bike, so I figured I'd do a review on this tire. I originally was going to use the Clement Explorer MSO because I wanted just a little bit extra volume. These are going to replace the Schwalbe G1 tires. That's a 700 by 35C tire. And again, I just want a little bit more cushion on my gravel bike, and I was going to use these Clements, but this is the clincher version, and I just could not get these to hold air. So that was really disappointing because I've read a lot of good things about the MSOs, and Clement seems to be really taking their sweet time and releasing this in a tubeless ready version, which I've heard that they are, but again, they're just taking a while. So I'm going to go ahead and try these Maxxis Rambler tires. I think this is going to be a really good tire. I've read some good things about it. This is going to be a good tire for those of you who have a gravel bike or a cyclocross bike and you want a little bit more cushion in your ride, especially in the off season. It's nice to replace your cyclocross race tires because, you know, cyclocross race season is only about 4 months. And so in the off season, when you just want to ride dirt roads or whatever, it's nice to get a little bit more cushion. So if your bike can fit a tire this wide, 40C is pretty wide, then I think this would be a good option. It could also be a good option for those of you who have a hardtail 29er that you want to ride in dirt road events, gravel events, and you want a little bit thinner tire than a mountain bike tire, one that's going to roll faster and be lighter. This could be a good option too. So let's get these seated up and see how they do. And actually, before I do put them on the bike, just want to show the tire up close. So 700 by 40C, and this is a 120 TPI tire. I went with the, I think they make this in a 60 TPI version, but I like the 120 TPI. It just gives a little bit better compliance. And of course, tubeless ready. So they should seat up pretty quickly. And they have the EXO sidewall protection, so a little bit thicker sidewall for rocks and stuff like that. And I do also want to show the tire that these are replacing. This is the Schwalbe G1. Again, this is a 35C tire. I think this actually measures wider than a 35C. They say 35, but it's probably more like a 37. But this is a pretty smooth rolling tire. And these are actually going to go on my cyclocross race bike in the off season, which is now. So I'll put the Maxxis Rambler on this bike, and again, just use these for my cyclocross race bike. And for those of you who are concerned about the weight of this tire, on this scale it's coming in at 360 grams. This is more of a macro scale as opposed to the ones where you lay components on. It gives really minute readings, but I think that's pretty accurate. So 360 grams, not too bad. Okay, I've got a cup of stands in the tire. I just sprayed some soap bubbles between the tire and the rim, and let's see how these things air up, because this is a very important thing for me. I hate when I have to work tires hard to get them aired up as tubeless. So again, this is on a tubeless rim, by the way. The stand's grail, as you can see. Not cool. The Schwalbe G1's aired up like immediately. I may have to take the valve core out, which I'd have to do sometimes, but let's just give it one more shot here. Alright, I guess I'm going to take the valve core out. This bead is a tad looser than the Schwalbe G1s. So usually when I take the valve core out, that works. Let's give it a shot. This is what I use, this little stands tool. I'd recommend picking one of these up. So take the valve core out, and I add a little bit of air to my air compressor, and let's give it another shot. Okay, so I've taken the valve core out. And by the way, if you don't know, what that does is it just allows the air to really blast in there super fast, and that usually works. So let's give this a shot. Okay, that works. So what you do is, you know, it pushes the beads up into the channel of the rim, and then you'll put the valve core back in, air them back up, and that usually will do the trick. Okay, valve core's back in, and there we go. You get that good solid pop. So I've got probably, I don't know, probably about 40 psi. I'll check it with my gauge in a minute. But so these aired up okay. I mean, you know, a lot of tires I do have to take the valve core out. Mountain bike tires I never have to. I could just, those air up really quick. But the good thing about these is there are no bubbles coming out. So I did spray air bubbles, or I'm sorry, soap bubbles in between the bead and the rim. And I do that so that these will seat up quickly and easily. He'll slide right into that channel, but also it helps you see if there's any air leaking out. And with the Clements, I mean, I had bubbles just, it's like a bubble factory all around the rim. So these tubeless ready tires really just, I mean, they lock in and with no leakage. And if you've seen my other video on whether or not tubeless ready tires are worth it, you'll see this is why I only use tubeless ready tires. So the Maxxis Ramblers are holding air great. Now I'll get the other one on and go for a ride and report back on how I feel these do as far as, you know, rolling resistance, cornering, that kind of thing. Alright, so I've spent some time riding these Maxxis Ramblers, and it's actually been 45 days since I shot that scene airing up the tires, because I really wanted to get some good rides in. And I actually ended up putting these on my cyclocross bike. So I originally put them on my gravel bike. They did great. But the cyclocross bike, I like riding on trails better, and these are a better tread, much better tread than the Schwalbe G1s. So I ended up with these back on the cyclocross bike. They feel about as plush as the Schwalbe G1s, a tad more because there's more volume, and the knobs are bigger than the Schwalbe G1s, which I think gives a little bit more cushion, but they give better traction, and I'll talk about traction here in a minute. But I ended up, I was testing the bikes. I was testing my cross bike on and the gravel bike on the trail, and I went out on the cross bike first with the Maxxis Ramblers, and then I went back out on the gravel bike, wasn't even thinking, did a corner with some wet leaves and went down like that, because the Schwalbe G1s, they pretty much don't have any knobs. The G1s are great for riding gravel, but I do not like those on the trail at all. There's just no traction. I'll show the knobs here on the Ramblers and talk about the pattern, because you get some pretty decent traction for riding trails. I mean, it's not like a mountain bike tire, but it's much better than a slick like the Schwalbe G1. So let's take a look at these up close and talk about them. So you can see the knobs in the center are more tightly spaced than the transition and the shoulder knobs. And this is really good for giving the tire a pretty low rolling resistance. On the road, these things roll really well. So on pavement, there's a little bit of a high-pitched hum, but not bad at all. Nothing like a mountain bike tire. They probably had a tad more rolling resistance than a pure slick or something like the Schwalbe G1s. The G1s, you know, I call them a slick. They have a little bit of a pattern to them, but that's a very small, smooth rolling tire. This, you can see the profile of the tire is pretty round, and what that does is it really gives it a nice transition, and these things corner great on pavement. I was really surprised at how well these things do on pavement. So when you're going into a corner, there is no harsh transition over to the side. It just corners really well. But you know, these really aren't for pavement, these are for gravel. And on gravel, you get some really good traction. Now, because the center knobs are tightly spaced, this would not be a mud tire. If you wanted a mud tire, I would look at something like the Clement Boss. That's a really decent mud tire, but a mud tire is going to have a higher rolling resistance, so you really need those for mud. Something like this is more of a dry condition tire, fast rolling tire. But again, you can see the shoulder knobs are pretty decent. So when you're cornering on gravel, you know, nothing does great in loose stuff, but for more hard pack stuff, these things have pretty good
pretty good traction in the corners, and like I said, on trails they do a pretty decent job as well. So whether these tires are on my cross or gravel bike, I ended up running about 32 in the back, give or take a couple psi, and about 29, again give or take a couple, in the front. I'm pretty light, so 142 pounds, but I feel like that's a pretty good compromise between a tire that's going to be pretty plush on the dirt roads and not bottom out. On the trails, I might add a couple more psi because of the roots. I don't like dinging my rims on roots, so I usually add a couple for riding on the trails. So you saw in my opening scene that I weighed these on that macro scale at about 360 grams. The claimed weight on these, on the 120 TPI version, is 390 grams. My buddy at gravelcyclist.com has done a review on these, and I would recommend, actually, if you're interested in these, going over to his website and checking out that review as well. He mentioned some things on there about mounting these up as tubeless, and I would recommend that. But he weighed these at about 380 and 381 grams. He has the micro scale, what I call it, more of a tabletop scale, I believe, and so he got a more accurate reading. So they're pretty light. I mean, that's a pretty light tire. The Schwalbe G1s are heavier. So this is a racing tire. This is advertised as a gravel road, dirt road race tire, but of course you could use it for general all-around riding. So really impressed with the weight of these tires as well. And incidentally, the 60 TPI version of this tire is a claimed weight of 435. So that's a little bit less expensive option. It's going to be not quite as supple of a ride, and it's a little bit heavier. So I would obviously recommend the 120 TPI if it fits into your budget. And both are tubeless ready. So, you know, really hats off to Maxxis for releasing this in a tubeless ready. And I think it's only a tubeless ready, which really shows the way tires are going now. More and more people are running tubeless, not just on mountain bikes, but also on cyclocross and gravel bikes, which is a very good thing. And I just want to mention too, you saw in the opening scene how the tire was a little difficult to mount right up without using soap, so I had to use some soap. My buddy at Gravel Cyclist recommends using sleek beeswax and mink oil furniture polish. I have not tried that, but he swears that it works even better than soap and water. So if you have trouble mounting these, you can try that as well. This tire is pretty predictable in sand. In sand, you want to run a bigger tire. Mud's a little bit different. Mud, you actually want a little bit thinner tire to cut into the mud and give you a little bit better traction. With sand, you want to kind of stay on top, and these do pretty good. I mean, nothing runs great in sand. It's always going to squirm a little bit when you're going through sand, but these do a pretty decent job going through sand and rolling, just like they're designed to do on dirt roads. They really do add some plushness to your ride, especially if you ride a cross bike and you're used to 32C tires. Adding a little bit more air volume really gives the bike a more compliant ride. And I'll just throw this out there, I mentioned this in my videos, but if you're looking for a cross bike, get a bike that fits 40C tires. Most of them do. You can see how much clearance I have on this bike. There's a pretty good amount of clearance left on these, between the chainstay and the tire. And again, this is why I really recommend getting a cross bike that fits 40Cs, just to make the bike more versatile. Because like I said in the opening scene, cross season is 4 or 5 months, and you want to be able to ride your cross bike on dirt roads because it's a blast. So just throw that out there. So that's going to wrap it up for this review of the Maxxis Rambler tires. This is one that I highly recommend, and one that's going to live on my cross bike in the off season for sure. I do, like I said, I recommend also the Schwalbe G1s. That's a really smooth rolling tire, but if you ride a little bit more aggressively, especially when you're descending on mountain roads or riding trails, having these little bit extra shoulder knobs really gives you some confidence in the corners. So this is a tire that I highly recommend either for your gravel bike or your cyclocross bike. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks for watching.